In 1946, the literary icon George Orwell published an essay titled Politics and the English Language. If you're unfamiliar with Orwell, he's the author behind classics like Animal Farm and 1984. At first glance, Orwell appears to be writing about politics and the English language. Reading it again recently, though, I think there is another message quietly running underneath the surface. I think Orwell was writing about personal responsibility. More specifically, the responsibility each of us has to pay attention to the words we use. His central argument is subtle but profound. Language does not simply express what we are thinking. It shapes the boundaries of what we are capable of thinking. I found myself coming back to that idea repeatedly over the first half of this year. Not because of artificial intelligence, but because I keep witnessing leadership teams say things that, on the surface, appear to have a shared meaning, while unconsciously, everyone in the room is interpreting those same words through an entirely different frame of reference. This week, I had an opportunity to help another leadership team become more aware of the language they were using as they were leading significant transformation. But before we go any further, let me take a minute to introduce myself if you are new here. My name is Chris Schmelzer, and I serve leaders who recognize the need and understand that the old models of leading and working are no longer keeping up with the pace of change. Every week, I track the subtle signals that a massive reset is coming for what we refer to as white-collar work, and share thoughts on how to lead yourself and your organization through the age of accelerating change. If you find any value in this video, like it, share your comments below, and subscribe. In preparation for the workshop, I met individually with each member of the leadership team. Those conversations were never intended to evaluate people or judge performance. They were simply an opportunity to understand how each person experienced the transformation through their own eyes. What was working? What felt difficult? Where did they see opportunity? Where were they experiencing resistance? Every conversation was recorded. Afterward, I uploaded the transcripts into an AI language analysis platform I have been experimenting with. Rather than simply summarizing each interview, the platform evaluates every conversation together, surfacing recurring patterns in the language leaders use. For a while now, I've had a suspicion that language reveals something about transformation that the traditional approach to organizational change often overlooks. Anyone who has conducted stakeholder interviews knows what it feels like when themes begin to emerge. By the fifth or sixth conversation, you begin hearing familiar concerns, frustrations, or opportunities. But when every word across every conversation can be examined collectively, something different begins to emerge. Not simply patterns in different people's opinions, but patterns in language, the words and phrases they actually use. Across nearly every interview, the leaders repeatedly described the transformation using remarkably similar phrases. I never questioned their commitment for the effort. Every one of them genuinely wanted the transformation to succeed. They cared deeply about the organization and the people they were leading. What surprised me wasn't their deep level of commitment. It was how automatic much of their language had become. These weren't carefully chosen descriptions. They were phrases that had quietly been inherited over years of working inside the organization. Stock phrases, the kind of language we all recognize because we've heard it hundreds of times. We have a communication problem. People aren't ready. We need more buy-in. We have to get everyone aligned. Nobody ever stopped to question what those statements actually meant. They had simply become accepted descriptions of reality. While developing tailored content for the workshop, I couldn't stop thinking about Orwell. He warned that when language becomes automatic, thinking often becomes automatic as well. We inherit phrases instead of examining them. We repeat ideas without asking ourselves whether we actually believe them. For the workshop, I decided to build exercises and experiences using their own language. Throughout the day, we projected these familiar phrases onto the screen. One by one, we slowed the conversation down and simply became curious. What belief is hidden inside this statement? What assumptions does this phrase require? How might someone else's nervous system interpret these words? Do these words create possibility, or do they quietly reinforce fear? The discussion was fascinating. Leaders challenged one another. They debated meanings. They unpacked assumptions that had been sitting quietly beneath conversations they had likely been having for months, perhaps even years. Eventually, I asked the group a simple question. Do these phrases sound familiar? Almost everyone nodded. One leader laughed and said, "That sounds like my normal Tuesday." I smiled and replied, "They should." Every one of those phrases came from our interviews. The room went completely quiet. It wasn't a silence of embarrassment or even of surprise. It was the kind of silence that happens when people suddenly recognize something that has been sitting in front of them all along. For the first time that day, the team wasn't evaluating the transformation anymore. They were evaluating the language they had unconsciously been using to describe it. Those are two very different conversations. The moment was powerful. But I don't think that experience is unique to one leadership team. The more organizations I spend time with, the more I suspect that one of the greatest barriers to transformation isn't strategy or technology, or even the resistance from those being impacted. It's that organizations slowly develop languages that become so familiar, they disappear from view. Everyone believes they are talking about the same thing because everyone is using the same words. Alignment, ownership, readiness, accountability, culture, innovation, transformation. Those words are spoken every day in conference rooms across the world. But I am beginning to wonder how often we mistake shared vocabulary for shared understanding. Because underneath each of those words sit entirely different assumptions, beliefs, experiences, and mental models. Everyone nods when someone says alignment, but how often do we stop to ask what each person actually means by it? I think Orwell is right. Language doesn't simply communicate our beliefs, it quietly reinforces them. If the dominant language surrounding transformation is inherited, constrictive, or rooted in fear, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised when people experience organizational change and transformation that way. Which brings me back to something I've been writing about over the last several weeks. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly capable of generating language for us, I wonder whether Orwell's essay becomes even more relevant. The real question may not be whether AI writes better sentences than we do. The more important question may be whether we remain aware enough to notice the beliefs, assumptions, and ways of thinking hidden inside the language we continue to use. I don't think Orwell is simply warning us about choosing the right or wrong words. More importantly, he is warning us about surrendering the responsibility of choosing them altogether. Organizations routinely review financial statements and budgets because they understand that every dollar compounds over time and shapes future decisions. A few dollars saved across every function eventually add up to something material. I'm beginning to wonder whether language compounds in much the same way. Conversations are made up of phrases, and every phrase quietly reinforces a belief. Ultimately, every belief gradually shapes what a leadership team begins to see as possible. Therefore, the words we choose don't simply describe reality. They become the lens through which we continue to experience it. Repeat a phrase often enough, and eventually it begins to feel less like an opinion and more like a fact. If Orwell was right, then it might be worth considering that transformation begins much earlier than we think. Maybe the first responsibility of anyone leading transformation is not simply choosing better words. It's becoming aware of the ones they've stopped choosing altogether. If you want to explore how to lead yourself and your organization through the age of accelerating change, my new book, The Missing Link, offers a new lens. It shows why most change efforts stall and how human capacity, not just strategy, determines success. Once you see it, you'll lead change very differently. You can access it for free right now. Link is below the video.